In 1979, two psychologists published a paper in a journal called Econometrica. Econometrica had never published psychology before. It was one of the most prestigious economics journals in the world. The paper was called Prospect Theory, and it quietly broke something that had been standing for 100 years. The authors were Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They were not economists. They had no interest in reforming a discipline. They were just reporting what they found. And what they found, nobody wanted to hear. To understand why this moment mattered, you need to understand how completely the rational model had taken over economics by the mid-20th century. Rationality wasn't one assumption among many, it was the assumption. Preferences were stable. People evaluated options logically, they chose whatever maximized value. This wasn't ideology. It was the everyday language of textbooks, policy frameworks, and every serious economic conversation. And to be fair, it had power. It explained prices, markets, it explained trade and incentives in ways they were genuinely useful. At aggregate level, rational behavior often emerged. The problem wasn't the simplification, the problem was what it left out. The disruption didn't come from inside economics, it came from psychology. For decades, psychologists had been studying how people actually make decisions under uncertainty. Not how they should decide, how they do decide. And what they kept finding didn't match the economic picture at all. People relied on mental shortcuts, they were influenced by irrelevant details, they reacted emotionally to losses and gains. Their choices shifted depending on context. Context that rational theory said shouldn't matter. At first, the two fields barely intersected. Economists had models, psychologists had experiments. Different methods, different questions. But the experimental results kept becoming harder to ignore. Take anchoring. Show someone a completely arbitrary number, even one they know is random. Then ask them to estimate something unrelated. Their answer drifts toward that number every time. Or ownership. People demand significantly more to give up something they already own than they would have paid to acquire the same thing. The object doesn't change, only the sense of possession. And yet the price changes dramatically. Or framing. A 90% chance of survival, a 10% chance of death. Identical outcomes, radically different reactions. The rational model says these should produce the same decisions. They don't. And critically, these patterns didn't appear once. They appear consistently, in experiment after experiment, across different people, different cultures, different contexts. Two Israeli psychologists would eventually make denial untenable. Kahneman and Tversky weren't trying to overthrow anything. They were making a political argument. They were running experiments, carefully designed ones, and what they revealed was quietly devastating. They didn't just show that people make mistakes. They showed that mistakes were structured, predictable, and systematic, rooted in identifiable mental processes that could be described, tested, and replicated. That was the shift. It wasn't people are irrational sometimes. It was here are the specific ways human thinking systematically deviates from the rational model. And here is how to predict it. At that point, ignoring psychology was no longer simplification, it was distortion. The shift that followed was slow, and much of the resistance was justified. Paradigm shift should be difficult. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Some of the resistance was legitimate scientific caution. Some was institutional inertia. Some was simply the human reluctance to revisit foundational assumptions that had served you well for decades. But the evidence kept arriving. More experiments, more anomalies, more real-world behavior refusing to fit clean equations. A small group of economists began crossing disciplinary lines, not to discard traditional economics, to extend it. The challenge was enormous. Psychology is messy, context-dependent, hard to formalize. The power of traditional economics had always been in clarity and precision. The challenge was to keep that precision, while acknowledging something essential. Context shapes choices. Framing alters outcomes. By the 1980s, the body of work began to cohere. By the 1990s, it was appearing in top journals. And in 2002, When Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist, received the Nobel Prize in economic sciences, it marked something profound. A quiet but unmistakable shift. This was no longer a fringe correction. This was a change in how economists understood human beings. Public policy changed. If people don't respond purely to incentives, then design matters, defaults matter, friction matters. Finance changed. Savings behavior, investment decisions, and risk perception looked completely different once rationality was no longer assumed. Technology noticed. Every app, every interface, every notification system is now designed around a predictable human bias. And at the individual level, the implications are unavoidable. Your anchors distort your estimates. Your loss aversion traps you in bad decisions. Your defaults quietly shape your habits. Not because you are irrational, because you are human. Behavioral economics didn't emerge because people wanted complexity. It emerged because reality refused to stay quiet. It doesn't describe humans as broken calculators. It describes them as psychologically rich, context-sensitive decision makers, predictable not despite the patterns, but because of them. In the next video, we'll focus on specific experiments that proved all of this. The studies that change how governments design policy, how companies design products, and how you make decisions every day. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and tell me in the comments which of the experiments we covered today hit closest to your own experience. See you in the next video.